Where did that character come from?
I was very lucky, you know, having got into show business, I was asked to do a summer season at the Spa Theatre, Scarborough. And of course I jumped at it. We used to do 4 shows, 1 show each week for a month. You got more people in that way. And there was a conjurer who, on the last show, was finding it rather difficult to get the material for a 4th show. So he said, and we were sharing a dressing room actually, he said, I'll tell you what, he said, why not, when I invite somebody to come up from the audience to mess up, but to do some tricks, to help me with the trick, he said, if you were in the audience and you came up and messed up a few tricks with me, he said, that would work smashing. So I said, fine, yeah, fine. So I went out and I bought a little tight-fitting grey suit for 30 shillings. How much is that now? It's about...
£1.50.
£1.50, that's right, yeah. And a cap for 1 shilling. That's about 2.5p, isn't it?
Something like that, yes.
and then I did, just he invited me up, and it worked so well that we were booked at the London Casino at the end of that season by Bernie Delfont, Lord Delfont. And that was the establishing of the suit called the Gump, and the conjurer's name was David Nixon.
Really?
Smashing wonderful. David Nixon. Oh, what a shame.
I never knew that.
Yeah, yeah.
That was how it all started. So the suit was the Gump, but inside it was this sort of pathetic little character in a way. And I want, yes, quite the trembly lip, the whole thing. Where did the character come from? Is that something that you worked on with very careful observation, or was it really something to do with your own really very extraordinary background?
Well, I suppose I had a tough time as a child, and I used to make a lot of mistakes, and people used to take the mickey, and particularly in the army. But because everything used to go wrong, I started to do wrong things deliberately, like getting out of step in the army. And of course, the sergeant can't really say that you're out. He can only blame you for being out of step. He can't say you're doing it deliberately. And then you know you can be marching with can I stand?
Yes, please do.
So if you're marching, you know, with that's it, with the right leg. Well, then if suddenly you're marching along like that, putting up the wrong hand, not easy to do, you know. And then he's saying, now it's the wrong hand and the wrong leg, wisdom. So I then would, can I stand up again? And I'd be marching along doing that then. And all the fellas are screaming with laughter, you see, and then the sergeant knows he's having the mickey taking, but he can't prove it, see?
Yes.
But those things became into the character of the Gump, making mistakes and trying to make it, trying to make skillful mistakes, really. But from my early childhood, you know, I had a tough time, and so pathos came from that as well.
It wasn't just a tough time. I mean, you had a pretty horrendous time. You had a man who's been described as your father as a boozing, brutal man. You were really abandoned by him, separated from your brother, abandoned by your mum. It was a rotten childhood, Norman.
Yes, my father put us with guardians, my brother and I, and after a couple of weeks he wasn't paying them, so they slung us out. And then he found somebody else. This was at a place called Row Green near Hatfield, and then we were slung out, and some other people just nearby in Hatfield, they took us, and after a couple of weeks I was badly behaved, cheeky, and so was my brother, and they slung us out, and my father wasn't paying again. They found some people at Deal who looked after us, and after a while they decided that it was really hard work looking after these 2 kids, so they slung me out and kept my brother.
So you were actually separated when you were 11, weren't
yes,
you?
and then I found some people through school chums of mine who took me on in Walmer, just near Deal, so I kept in touch with my brother. And I was with them until I left school. When I was 13.
Norma, you virtually lived an entire lifetime in just the first 14 years of your life, but then you went off and joined the army, and that really was a major turning point, wasn't it?
I went to Scotland Yard, which was a recruiting centre at that time, and fortunately it was night time, so I got a kip in the guard room as well. And then the following morning I had a medical examination, which I passed. I still got the attestation papers, as they called them in those days, and I was actually 4 foot 10 and a half in height, and I weighed 5 stone 9. And then I had to wait till the following morning to get an interview with the bandmaster, which I did, and he said, now, of course, you want to get in the band? And I said, oh, yes, sir. He said, you know all about music? I said, oh, yes, sir. He said, well, what's a flat? And I said, don't know that, sir. He said, well, what's a sharp then? I said, well, I don't know that one either, sir. You know, like we were playing riddles. And he said, well, you don't know anything about music, do you? I said, no, sir, but I'd like a chance to learn. And he must have been sorry for me, because he said, well, why didn't you say so in the first place? And he took me. And I was on my way to India just 3 weeks later, having been at Aldershot and so forth, and on my way to India to join the 10th Royal Hussars. And a time of my life, wonderful sunshine, my own bed, regular food, football, cricket, swimming, wonderful chums, learning to play music, riding horses. Oh.
Better than going to a country club.
I forgot to tell you, I was mad on boxing. And I used to, when we were doing the training, you do the shadow boxing, you see, that's with an opponent, you know, you're hitting him, and I used to let the imaginary opponent hit me. I won't stand up, because shall I do a stand-up one for you? No, it's all right. And then, the blokes used to laugh so much that they called the entertainment officer over to watch me doing the shadow boxing. So then I was in the concert party, and I was doing the clarinet, sea shanties, the singing, tap dancing, shadow boxing, comedy. Oh, I went to the offices. We used to do all the troupe concerts, and then one day we went, or one evening rather, we went and did a concert for the officers. And of course, especially in those days, the officers were rather more like that, you know, sitting watching this concert, which is an awful bore, as it were. But when I came on and started to tap dance, they started to laugh. And I was a bit peeved. You mustn't get annoyed with an officer. But I was a bit peeved, and I deliberately tripped, and they laughed really loud. So I thought, oh, all right. So I tripped and fell over, and they screamed. And as I sat on the floor there, I thought, that's it. Oh, comedy.
I've cracked it.
Yeah. And so that was it. And when I was demobbed, I went to Collins Music Hall in Islington, and I went and saw the manager, and he said, what do you want? I said, well, I'd like to go on the stage, sir. He said, well, don't be silly. He said, there's stars coming out of the army, and they're closing the variety theatres all over the country. You don't stand a chance. Forget it. Go and get a job. And so I took a room nearby, and I became that man's shadow. I mean, if he was in the bar and he raised a pint of beer to his mouth, my head was under his arm. Until eventually he said, look, if I let you go on First House Monday, because it used to be twice a night, if I let you go on First House Monday and you're no good, will you promise to go away and leave me alone? And I said, yes, fair enough, sir. Oh, yes. And so I went on First House Monday, and I wouldn't say I was a smash hit, but...
well, you wouldn't say, but the critics said you were.
Not on that one, no, because but you see, what I was going to say is that nobody came round and said, well done, but nobody came round and said, get out. That was the important thing.
You went on and did lots of other things, but
yeah.
The really interesting one, I think, is when you went to the casino. Your act was about 14 minutes long, and they said, Wisdom, you've got 7 minutes. You took a real gamble, didn't you? Quite
right, yeah, because, yeah, that's right. When I went for rehearsal, yeah, Mike was 14 minutes. You're dead on there. And and I went and I was down for 8 minutes. So I went to Bernard Delfont, who was sitting in the front row, and said, excuse me, sir, but my act is 14 minutes. He said, I'm sorry, we've got a crowded bill. I've taken you on as an extra. And he said, so therefore you'll have to be satisfied. And he said, I've got to go worse than that. You'll be down to 6 minutes because we're going to overrun time. So I went to the dressing room and I thought, well, now, if I do 6 minutes and I'm no good, they'll give me the sack. If I do 6 minutes and it's all right, they'll just leave it at that. If I do 14 minutes and that's no good, they'll give me the sack. And the same if I, well, we'll have to see. So then I went and did my band call with the musical director, dear old Harold Collins, and he said, what are you going to cut? I said, no, I'll do all the music as is. I cut most of the dialogue so that I get down to that. He said, fine. So I did all the music. And then I went on stage that night and I did the whole 14 minutes. And it was, sounds like swank, but it was wow.